The endless darkness of a Maine winter has a way of changing people. Those long frigid nights when the wind howls through the pines like a hungry beast. Nights when families huddle around hearths, telling stories to keep the shadows at bay. But some shadows cannot be dispelled by firelight. And some stories are better left untold. The lamplight flickers as I write these words, casting elongated shadows across the weathered pages of my journal. Outside, the wind moans through the eaves. A sound not unlike the distant keening I heard in those woods so many years ago. I've spent decades collecting fragments of this tale, piecing together accounts from those few who survived, cross-referencing faded newspaper clippings and half-forgotten oral histories. What follows is as complete an account as will ever exist. This is the story of Abel Fletcher and the town of Mill Haven, Maine. The year was 1873. And what happened there has long been whispered about in the coastal villages of New England. Some say it was divine punishment for the town's greed, the reckless way they stripped the ancient forest bare. Others blame the industrial poisons from the mill that leaked into the soil and water, warping nature in ways science still cannot fully explain. The more superstitious folk claim it was the work of something ancient, something that had slumbered beneath the pines for countless centuries until young Abel Fletcher unwittingly awakened it with his strange, haunting melodies. I've heard all these theories and more in smoke-filled taverns from Portland to Bangor, whispered by old men whose hands tremble not from age but from memory. Whatever you choose to believe, I caution you. This story is not for the faint of heart. What happened in Mill Haven challenges our understanding of the natural world and the boundaries between species. It raises questions better left unanswered. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Mill Haven was a lumber town nestled between the dense woods and the rocky coast of Maine. The sawmill on the river employed most of the men, turning ancient trees into timber that built ships and houses across the growing nation. The mill's constant whine could be heard at all hours, a mechanical beast that never seemed to sleep. Massive water wheels turned the gigantic saws that transformed centuries-old pines into neat uniform planks, while the river ran rusty with sawdust and chemical treatments. The lumber baron who owned the mill, Jeremiah Blackwood, had grown wealthy on the spoils of the forest, building himself a grand house on the hill overlooking the town. The other residents of Mill Haven lived in much humbler dwellings, many constructed from the very wood they harvested day after day. The irony was not lost on them, tearing down the forest to build their own cages. The winter of 1873 had been particularly brutal. The snow had started falling in October and hadn't stopped until late March, burying the town under drifts higher than a man's head. For nearly 6 months, Mill Haven had been isolated from the outside world. The roads impassable. The river frozen solid. Food stores dwindled dangerously low. 3 elderly residents died from the cold when their firewood ran out. A child was lost in a blizzard. Her body not found until the spring thaw revealed it. Preserved in ice like a porcelain doll. By April, when our story begins, the people of Mill Haven were desperate for spring. They emerged from their homes, pale and thin, like prisoners released after a long confinement. They blinked in the strengthening sunlight, turning their faces upward like flowers seeking nourishment. But the harshness of winter had left its mark on more than just their bodies. Tension hung in the air. A collective trauma that made people quick to anger and slow to forgive. Something had changed in Mill Haven, though none could quite put their finger on what it was. Abel Fletcher was 12 years old that April, a skinny, pale boy with eyes too large for his narrow face and hair as black as a raven's wing. Those eyes, deep-set and almost violet in certain light, unnerved people. They seemed to look through rather than at you, as if Abel were seeing something invisible to everyone else. His movements were deliberate, almost graceful, unlike the rough-and-tumble boys his age. He spoke rarely, and when he did, his voice was soft, requiring people to lean in close to hear him, something few were willing to do. He lived with his father, Thomas Fletcher, in a small cabin at the edge of town, where the neatly arranged buildings of Mill Haven surrendered to the chaotic growth of the forest. The cabin had once been cheerful, with curtains at the windows and flower boxes, when Abel's mother was alive, but in the 5 years since her passing, it had fallen into disrepair. The curtains tattered, the flower boxes rotted and empty. Thomas worked at the sawmill and was known throughout Mill Haven as a hard man with a harder fist. Especially after the death of his wife during the birth of their second child, a daughter who survived her mother by only a few hours. Grief had turned Thomas mean, then bitter, then hollow. He sought solace in the bottom of whiskey bottles, and when solace wasn't forthcoming, he settled for oblivion. "That boy of yours gives me the shivers," Martha Cunningham told Thomas one afternoon as he purchased his weekly bottle at her husband's general store. "Always staring at things no one else can see. My Robert says he won't play with him, says Abel talks to himself in the woods. It ain't natural." Thomas had merely grunted in response. But later that night, with the whiskey burning in his veins, he'd backhanded Abel across the face for embarrassing him in town. The boy hadn't cried out or fought back. He'd simply touched his bleeding lip with a curious expression, as if the pain were an interesting phenomenon to be studied rather than endured. "That boy ain't right," Thomas Fletcher would mutter to anyone who would listen at Cunningham's general store. "Always skulking about, humming to himself. Never wants to learn useful things. Won't even bait a fishing hook." His mother's fault filling his head with fairy stories and nonsense about talking to animals. "Coddled him too much, she did." The truth was, Abel couldn't bear to cause pain to any living creature. He would flinch when his father crushed a spider underfoot or when the other boys tortured frogs by the creek. Once he'd tried to stop Robert Cunningham and the blacksmith's son from tying tin cans to a stray dog's tail. They'd pushed him face first into the mud for his trouble, calling him girl boy and Fletcher the fretter. Abel had not cried then either, though the humiliation burned far more fiercely than his father's slaps ever could. This sensitivity earned him nothing but scorn in a town built on the destruction of the forest and its inhabitants. Mill Haven was a place where men proved their worth by their capacity for violence against trees, animals, sometimes each other, and too often their own families. Softness was seen as weakness, and weakness was not tolerated. But Abel had a secret, a gift, though he didn't understand it himself. When he was alone in the woods, he could produce sounds from deep in his throat. Not quite singing, not quite humming, complex vibrations that seemed to resonate with the natural world around him. He discovered this ability one summer day when he was 10, sitting alone on a moss-covered log in a sun-dappled clearing. Abel had been thinking of his mother, of her gentle hands, and the songs she would sing to him at bedtime. Songs in a language she claimed her grandmother had taught her, songs that had no meaning Abel could discern, but that filled him with a sense of belonging. As he recalled the melodies, he began to absent-mindedly hum. Not his mother's songs, but something new. Something that seemed to rise from the earth itself through the soles of his bare feet. The vibrations started low in his chest, then moved up his throat, emerging as a complex series of tones that no human voice should have been able to produce simultaneously. As he continued this strange performance, he noticed a monarch butterfly land on his knee. Then another settled on his shoulder and another on his outstretched finger. Soon a dozen of the orange and black insects surrounded him, their delicate wings opening and closing in perfect synchrony with the rhythms he was creating. They remained there, seemingly entranced until he stopped his strange song. Then, as if released from a spell, they dispersed into the summer air. Over the next 2 years, Abel refined this talent in secret. He learned different tones and rhythms, discovering that certain combinations would attract different creatures, birds, squirrels, dragonflies. He found he could calm an angry fox that had been caught in a hunter's trap, soothing it long enough to free its paw before it bounded away into the underbrush. Once, during a violent thunderstorm, he had sheltered in a hollow tree and found himself sharing the space with a terrified rabbit. His strange song had calmed the creature so completely that it fell asleep pressed against his leg, but he found a particular affinity with moths. The night-flying insects seemed especially drawn to the low thrumming vibrations he could produce at the back of his throat. On summer evenings, he would sit in the clearing behind his house and sing to them, watching in wonder as they emerged from the darkness to circle around him in a living cloud. Their powder-soft wings would brush against his skin, a sensation that sent pleasant shivers along his spine. Sometimes, if he held perfectly still, they would land on his upturned face, their feathery antennae tickling his cheeks as if tasting his essence. These communions filled Abel with a sense of peace he found nowhere else. The moths never judged him, never found him lacking. They came to his call willingly, eagerly even. In their presence. He wasn't the strange silent boy who didn't fit in. He was something else, something important, something necessary. The moths needed his song as much as he needed their acceptance. He especially loved the lunar moths, with their long, sweeping tails and pale green wings, like pieces of moonlight given form. They were less common than the smaller brown moths, but when they appeared, they brought with them a profound sense of grace that moved Abel to tears. He would watch their ghostly forms drift through the night air, marveling at their ephemeral beauty. Adult lunar moths lived only for a week, existing solely to mate and lay eggs before dying. They didn't even have mouths to feed. Their entire existence was a brief, beautiful race against time. Abel wondered what that would be like to be born with such clear purpose to fulfill your destiny in one magnificent fleeting moment so different from human lives long and confused and filled with pain. Sometimes he envied the moths, their simplicity, their certainty. This secret communion was Abel's only joy in a life otherwise marked by his father's neglect and the other children's cruelty. But as winter gripped Mill Haven in late 1872, the moths disappeared, and Abel was left alone once more. The forest, once his sanctuary, became an inhospitable place of biting wind and barren trees. He retreated into himself, spending the long winter nights huddled under threadbare blankets, remembering the touch of moth wings and dreaming of spring. Which brings us back to April 1873, when the snow finally began to melt, revealing the muddy ground beneath. The town stirred from its winter slumber, and the mill whistle blew once more, calling men back to their labors. Abel, too, felt the change in the air, a restlessness, an anticipation. Something was different this year. The quality of light, the smell of the earth as it thawed, the patterns of bird song at dawn, all suddenly altered as if nature herself were holding her breath, waiting. The first strange incident occurred on April 12th. Ezekiel Thorne, the town's most experienced logger, was marking trees deep in the forest when he came across something he had never seen before. In a small clearing, every tree and bush was covered in a fine silvery webbing. It glistened in the dappled sunlight, stretching from branch to branch like ghostly gossamer. Ezekiel was no stranger to spiderwebs or caterpillar nests, having spent over 4 decades in these woods. But this was different. The silk was thicker, stronger, with an iridescent quality that made it appear almost metallic, and the sheer quantity of it was astonishing, as if hundreds, no, thousands of spinners had worked in concert to create this silver tapestry. He approached cautiously, extending his walking stick to touch the nearest strand. The silk clung to the wood, stretching rather than breaking. When he pulled the stick back, the strand thinned but held firm, exhibiting a tensile strength that defied Ezekiel's considerable experience with natural materials. A drop of sweat trickled down his weathered face despite the cool April air. Something about the silk made his skin crawl, awakening a primal fear he hadn't felt since he was a boy, lost in these same woods during a moonless night. Ezekiel had never been a superstitious man. He prided himself on his practical nature, his rational approach to the world. But standing in that clearing, surrounded by the unnatural silk, he found himself muttering a prayer his mother had taught him, a charm against evil influences. His callous fingers fumbled for the small wooden cross he wore beneath his shirt. A talisman he hadn't thought about in years. He backed away slowly, unwilling to turn his back on the silver-shrouded clearing. Only when the strange webbing was out of sight, did he turn and hurry back toward town, his planned day of work forgotten. It was as if some giant spider had been spinning all winter long, Ezekiel later told the patrons of the Crossed Axes Tavern, his hands trembling slightly as they clutched his mug of ale. Never seen anything like it in 40 years of logging. Gave me a queer feeling. It did like I was being watched, though I didn't see a living thing in that clearing. Not a bird, not a squirrel, nothing. Jeremiah Blackwood, the mill owner, dismissed Ezekiel's story with a derisive snort. Old man's eyes playing tricks, he declared, slapping down coins for another round. Probably just ordinary spiderwebs catching the light funny. Or maybe Thorne's been nipping at the bottle while on the job. Most of the other men laughed, eager to align themselves with the wealthy Blackwood rather than the aging logger, but a few of the older workers exchanged troubled glances. Ezekiel Thorne was known for his sharp eyes and honest reports. If he said he'd seen something unusual, there was a good chance he had. Within days, Other loggers reported similar findings. Patches of forest draped in the same mysterious silk. The sightings spread outward from the clearing Ezekiel had discovered as if the phenomenon were expanding its territory. And they noticed something else. An unusual number of moths in the woods weeks before they typically appeared. Abel heard these stories with growing excitement. The moths were returning early, and he had missed them desperately. Each night he listened to his father's heavy breathing, waiting for it to transform into the deep, rhythmic snores that signaled Thomas Fletcher had passed out from his evening whiskey. Only then would Abel dare to slip from his narrow bed and creep across the creaking floorboards toward freedom. On the night of April 15th, a Tuesday, Abel made his move. The moon was nearly full, casting the world in silver and shadow as he carefully eased the cabin door open and stepped into the cool spring air. The forest loomed before him, a wall of darkness punctuated by patches of moonlight. To most boys his age, it would have seemed forbidding, even terrifying. To Abel, it felt like coming home. He moved through the trees with the confidence of familiarity, his feet finding the nearly invisible path he had worn over years of similar journeys. The nighttime forest was alive with sound, the soft hooting of owls, the rustling of small nocturnal creatures, the creaking of branches in the gentle breeze. Abel absorbed these sounds, incorporating them into his understanding of the forest's mood. Tonight, it was peaceful but expectant, as if the woods, too, were waiting for something. After 15 minutes of walking, Abel reached his special clearing. It was a perfectly circular space about 30 feet across, surrounded by ancient pine trees that seemed to stand guard over this natural cathedral. The ground was carpeted with soft moss that glowed faintly in the moonlight, creating the impression of a stage set for some mystical performance. At the center of the clearing stood a flat rock the size of a dining table, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. Abel approached the rock and climbed atop it, settling cross-legged at its center. He closed his eyes and took several deep breaths, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. He listened to his heartbeat, to the blood rushing in his ears, to the subtle symphony of the forest around him. Then, when he felt perfectly attuned to his surroundings, he began to sing. The sound that emerged from Abel's throat was different from any he had produced before. The sound that tore from Abel's throat was no longer his own. It was something deeper, richer, a vibration that seemed to bleed from his very soul, infused with the profound loneliness and desperate longing of the endless winter. The notes didn't just come from his vocal cords, they resonated from his entire being, as if he were a hollow instrument played by some invisible, ancient musician. They defied all music, these overlapping, intertwining tones. They should have been a discordant mess, but instead, they wove a harmony so haunting it made the air itself tremble. Abel closed his eyes, surrendering to the song, letting it pour out and fill the clearing. He felt it resonate deep within the ancient trees, in the very bedrock beneath him. The mossy ground began to pulse in a slow, rhythmic answer. The air grew warm and heavy, thick with a strange energy that raised the hairs on his arms. The song built and built, a terrifying, beautiful force that threatened to shatter his small frame from the inside out. His consciousness didn't just expand, it shattered its boundaries, rushing out past the clearing, beyond the forest, into a vast and alien space his human mind could not comprehend. And in that infinite darkness, he felt it. A presence. Impossibly ancient, patient beyond measure, and filled with a deep, primal hunger. Then came the first touch. A whisper-soft brush of wings against his cheek. His eyes flew open, and a gasp caught in his throat. The clearing was no longer his own. It was theirs. Hundreds. Thousands. Their wings created a gentle, rustling whisper that sounded like the pages of a forgotten book turning all at once. But these were not the simple brown moths of summers past. These were monstrous, magnificent. Their wingspans were as wide as his hand, their bodies plush with silver fur that shimmered in the moonlight. Their wings were alive. Intricate, shifting patterns glowed with a faint bioluminescence, forming symbols that hovered on the edge of meaning, like words from a language he almost knew. This eerie blue-white light transformed the clearing, painting the trees as pale sentinels and carving deep, sharp shadows across the ground. The moths moved as one, a single mind in 1,000 bodies, forming perfect, rotating concentric circles around him. It was a ritual, an aerial dance with rules and meanings from another world. The air grew thick with their scent, dusty, like old books and dried flowers, but undercut by something metallic and unsettling. And among them, one ruled them all. A moth with a wingspan a full foot across, the color of aged bone. And on its wings, a pattern that froze Abel's blood, the stark, unmistakable approximation of a human face. Two dark eyes, a suggestion of a nose, a curved, waiting mouth. It hovered directly before him, its antennae quivering as it tasted his song. Abel felt no fear, only a terrifying, profound connection. Slowly, he raised his hand. To his astonishment, the giant moth descended, landing gracefully on his open palm. Its weight was surprising, substantial, like a small bird. A strange warmth radiated from its body. Its 6 legs gripped his skin, tiny hooks anchoring it without pain. Its multifaceted eyes caught the moonlight, fracturing it into 1,000 prismatic shards. Abel wasn't looking at an insect. He was being studied by an intelligence vast and ancient. Then it happened. The moth's feathery antennae extended, reaching not for his face, but for his wrist. The touch was electric. A jolt like lightning seared up his arm. His mind was flooded, overwhelmed. Visions of primeval forests with trees that scraped the sky. Silver clouds of moths darkening continents. Cycles of sleep and awakening spanning centuries. He saw them emerging, covering the land in silk before retreating to hidden chambers deep within the earth. He saw humans, painted, primitive people kneeling before giant moths, singing songs that echoed his own. He saw settlers fleeing in terror from descending swarms. And beneath it all, a hunger. Not for flesh, but for transformation. A desire to change, to evolve, to become something new and terrible and wonderful. He saw Mill Haven transformed, its buildings and people altered beyond recognition. And he saw himself at the very center of it all, a conductor of this cataclysmic metamorphosis. Most terrifying of all, he saw what waited beneath the forest. Something ancient. Patient. And now, awake. The connection broke. Abel fell backward, gasping, his heart a wild drum against his ribs. The bone-white moth rose, rejoining its swirling brethren. They circled his prone form once before melting back into the darkness, leaving him utterly alone and shaking on the cold ground. 4 minutes, he couldn't move. His body felt foreign, his understanding of the world shattered and rearranged. He had glimpsed a plan unfolding across millennia, and he knew, with a certainty that turned his blood to ice, that he was now a part of it. He finally stumbled to his feet, legs trembling. The clearing was just a clearing again, bathed in ordinary moonlight. But Abel Fletcher knew nothing would ever be ordinary again. He had been chosen. Marked. The weight of it, a purpose he could not understand, pressed down on his narrow shoulders as he walked back to a town that was already changing, a town he had unknowingly doomed. The official record states the town of Mill Haven, Maine, was destroyed by a forest fire in 1915. The official record is a lie. The truth is far more terrifying. The truth began with a boy named Abel Fletcher and a song that woke an ancient horror from beneath the pines. A horror of silk and transformation. I've pieced this account together from forgotten journals and half-believed whispers. And what I found changes everything. After Abel's sacrifice, the people of Mill Haven tried to forget. The silk had vanished, leaving no physical evidence of the nightmare. Some convinced themselves it was mass hysteria, a delusion from tainted grain or poisoned water. But in their dreams, they all remembered. The silk. The moths. The boy's terrible, beautiful song that saved them. They buried Abel on a hillside. His father, Thomas, a broken man carved of grief and remorse, made the headstone himself. It read, Abel Fletcher. He sang for us all. Life attempted a return to normal. But the woods were never quiet again. On certain nights, when the moon was full and the air was still, a faint, soothing hum could be heard from Abel's grave. And children began reporting sightings of an unusually large moth with bone-white wings. The town itself is gone now. Nature reclaimed the land with a speed that was unnatural. Hikers who find the ruins today report an oppressive silence. No birds. No insects. Just the wind, which sometimes sounds like a human voice humming a tuneless melody. I didn't believe it either. Not until I found the journals of Dr. Harrison Wells, the town physician. He kept detailed records, sketches, and samples. Under a microscope, the silk defied all analysis. Its molecular structure was alien, unnatural. This was no spiderweb. My research led me to the land records. Mill Haven did exist. But the Great Fire of 1915? I found no contemporary accounts. The town didn't burn, it simply vanished. I went there last summer. I felt the silence. The feeling of being watched by countless, unseen eyes. I did not stay after dark. Some boundaries should not be crossed. Wildlife surveys of the area note an unusually high population of moths, many of species unknown to science. Entomologists report strange anomalies, physical characteristics that seem almost human. And every spring, park rangers find patches of forest draped in that same, inexplicable silvery webbing. The affected area grows larger each year. The cycle was interrupted, not broken. Abel's sacrifice bought time, nothing more. The moths remember. They wait, patiently, for the next singer. Somewhere, a child with eyes too large for their face has begun to hum a strange, compelling tune. A tune that makes the moths dance. The migration approaches. It is already beginning. Listen. Do you hear it? That tapping against your window is just a branch in the wind. That silver gleam at the edge of your vision is a trick of the moonlight. Nothing more. But perhaps you should check. Just to be sure. After all, the cycle continues. And the humming has already begun. Good night, dear viewers. Sleep well. And perhaps just this once leave a light on. The archives at Miskatonic University hold more than just Dr. Wells' journals. Deep in the restricted section, behind doors that require special permission to open, there are specimens kept in jars of amber-colored fluid. Moths with wingspans that should not be possible, their bodies covered in what looks like fine silver fur. But it's the details that haunt me, the faint patterns on those wings that look less like natural markings and more like tiny, screaming faces if you stare at them too long. I've spoken to park rangers who patrol that territory now. They don't like to talk about it, but after enough persuasion, they'll admit to things. How their radios crackle with static the deeper they go into those woods. How compasses spin uselessly. How sometimes, in the dead of night, they'll see lights moving between the trees, not the flicker of fireflies, but a soft, pulsing glow in shades of blue and white. They have a name for it among themselves, ghost light. They say it's swamp gas or foxfire, but their eyes tell a different story. They've seen things they can't explain, and they've made a silent agreement not to dig too deep. The most chilling account came from a young ranger named Evans. He was on a routine patrol near the old Mill Haven Township line when he found a patch of the silver webbing stretched between two pines. It was stronger than any material he'd ever touched. When he tried to cut a sample with his knife, the blade couldn't sever it. Instead, the strand stretched, thinning but not breaking, and a low hum seemed to travel up the blade into his hand, a vibration that made his teeth ache. He left the area immediately and reported nothing. Who would believe him? The old-timers in the nearby villages still tell stories, though they've become watered down over time, turned into folktales to scare children. They talk of the silent woods and warn against going in after dark. They say the trees remember the boys' song and sometimes sing it back on windy nights. They whisper about the moon moths, creatures that are neither fully insect nor spirit, that guide lost souls away from the paths deeper into the forest, never to return. But the cycle isn't just continuing in the woods of Maine. There are reports now, scattered and easily dismissed, from other parts of the world. A village in the Carpathian Mountains where the livestock were found encased in a strange, silky substance. A remote town in the Japanese Alps where the children have started humming a strange, discordant melody in their sleep. A biological research station in the Amazon that sent one final, fragmented report about unidentified Lepidopteran swarms exhibiting intelligent group behavior before going silent. These incidents are disconnected, anomalies. But what if they're not? What if Mill Haven wasn't an isolated event, but the first sign of a global awakening? What if Abel's song didn't just wake something under that Maine forest, but sent a ripple through a network of slumbering things across the planet? The hum is the key. It's a frequency, a signal. And it's getting stronger. I've started hearing it myself, not just in recordings from the woods, but in the white noise of my apartment at night. In the drone of a distant airplane. Sometimes, in the silence between heartbeats. I've arranged for all my research, my notes, the audio recordings of that faint, pervasive hum, to be sealed away with Wells' journals. Perhaps it's cowardice. Perhaps it's hope that someone smarter, braver, better equipped will find it one day and understand what must be done. But for now, I check my window screens every night. I keep the lights on. I play music to drown out the silence. And I try not to think about the child who must be out there somewhere, right now, humming a tune they don't understand, feeling a connection to the night they can't explain, drawing the attention of things that should have stayed asleep. The moth is drawn to the flame, yes. But perhaps the flame also calls to the moth. Perhaps our lights, our cities, our noise, it's all a desperate, unconscious attempt to keep the darkness at bay. To drown out the ancient song that is always there, waiting just beneath the surface of our world, waiting for the right listener to hear it and sing back. I think I hear it now. Not outside. Inside. A low thrumming at the edge of my hearing. A vibration that seems to come from within the walls. From within my own mind. It's just the refrigerator kicking on. It's just the pipes in the building settling. It's just my imagination, frayed by too much research and too little sleep. Isn't it? Perhaps you should listen for yourself. Turn down the volume. Listen to the silence around you. What do you hear? Good night. And if you value your dreams, leave every light you have burning bright. The most unsettling development is the pattern emerging from the global reports. It's not random. The incidents are occurring along specific geological fault lines and areas with unique magnetic anomalies. It's as if whatever sleeps beneath the earth is connected through a vast, subterranean network of crystalline structures or mycelial pathways we cannot see. They're not just waking up, they're communicating, coordinating. A linguist who studied the humming patterns from different regions before she abruptly ended her research told me in a hushed, frantic phone call that the vibrations weren't random noise. She believed they were a syntax. A language of resonance used to convey complex information across vast distances. She called it lithovibration and claimed the earth itself was the medium. The call cut out and she never answered my attempts to contact her again. The final piece of this dreadful puzzle came to me from a source I cannot reveal. A single page, smuggled out of a high-security laboratory. It was a spectrographic analysis of the Mill Haven hum. The sound wave pattern, when visualized, didn't look like noise. It looked like a twisting, intricate double helix. It wasn't just a song. It was a code. A blueprint. Abel didn't just wake them up. His song, passed down through his bloodline, was a key. And it didn't just unlock their slumber, it began a process. A process of rewriting. The silk isn't a cocoon in the traditional sense. It's a biological printer. A weaver of new forms. And the hum is its operating signal, growing stronger as the process nears completion. They're not just coming back. They're preparing the world for their return. They are tuning it. And with every child who hums an absent-minded tune, with every patch of strange web found in a forest, with every nightmare of wings and whispers, the signal strengthens. The question is no longer if they will return. The question is what will they make of us when they do? Will we be hosts? Fuel? Or will we, like the trees of Mill Haven, be woven into something new, something terrible, and something eternal? Listen closely tonight. The silence isn't silent anymore. It's listening back. And it's humming along.